The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the small, quiet town. Life here was simple, predictable, and safe, or so everyone thought. In the heart of the town lived a young woman who had always been different from the rest. She wasn't loud or flashy, but there was something about her that made people curious. She had a calm confidence, a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. What most people didn't know was that she had spent years training in martial arts, self-defense, and survival skills. She wasn't just strong, she was prepared for anything. Her journey hadn't been easy. Growing up, she had faced challenges that forced her to grow up faster than most. She had seen the darker side of life, and instead of letting it break her, she decided to fight back, not with anger, but with discipline and determination. Her training became her escape, her way of reclaiming control over her life. She didn't talk about it much, but those who knew her well could see the fire in her eyes. One evening, as she was walking home from the local market, she noticed something unusual. A group of strangers had arrived in town. They were loud, brash, and seemed to be looking for trouble. They didn't blend in with the quiet, peaceful vibe of the town. People whispered about them, but no one dared to confront them. They were intimidating, and their presence made everyone uneasy. She didn't think much of it at first. She had seen her fair share of troublemakers, and she knew how to handle herself. But as days passed, the group's behavior became more aggressive. They started harassing shopkeepers, picking fights, and causing chaos. The townspeople were too scared to stand up to them, and the local authorities seemed powerless to stop them. One night, as she was closing up the small gym where she trained, she heard a commotion outside. She stepped out to see the group surrounding an elderly man who owned a nearby bakery. They were taunting him, demanding money, and threatening to destroy his shop if he didn't comply. The man looked terrified, and the bystanders just stood there, frozen in fear. Something inside her snapped. She had spent years training for moments like this, not to show off, but to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She walked up to the group, her step steady and her expression calm. "Leave him alone," she said, her voice firm but not aggressive. The leader of the group, a tall, burly man with a sneer on his face, turned to her. "And who do you think you are?" he asked, clearly amused by her audacity. "I'm someone who's not going to let you bully innocent people," she replied, her eyes locked on his. The man laughed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked as unassuming as her. He took a step closer, trying to intimidate her, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she stood her ground, ready for whatever came next. What happened next was a blur. The man lunged at her, but she moved with lightning speed, dodging his attack and using his own momentum against him. In a matter of seconds, he was on the ground, groaning in pain. The rest of the group stared in shock, unsure of what to do. They had never seen anyone take down their leader so easily. She turned to them, her expression calm but her eyes blazing. "Leave this town, and don't come back," she said, her voice steady. "If you do, you'll regret it." The group hesitated for a moment, then quickly helped their leader to his feet and scurried away. The townspeople watched in awe, their fear slowly turning into admiration. They had never seen anything like it. The quiet, unassuming woman they had known for years had just stood up to the bullies and won. As the crowd dispersed, the elderly baker approached her, tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "You saved me." She smiled softly and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "This is my home too, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect it." Word of what had happened spread quickly through the town. People started looking at her differently, not just as the quiet woman who kept to herself, but as someone who had the courage to stand up for what was right. She didn't seek the attention or the praise, she just went back to her life, training at the gym and helping out where she could. But the encounter had changed something in her. She realized that her training wasn't just for her own protection, it was a tool she could use to make a difference in the lives of others. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she was ready for whatever came her way. Little did she know, the group she had confronted wasn't going to let things go so easily. They had been humiliated, and they were determined to get revenge. The quiet town was about to face a storm, and she was the only one who could stand in its way. As the days passed, she could feel the tension in the air. The town was on edge, and so was she. But she wasn't afraid. She had spent her whole life preparing for moments like this. She was trained to fight, and now, they were about to learn the hard way. The days following the confrontation were tense. The townspeople, though grateful for her bravery, couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. The group of troublemakers had left, but their presence still lingered like a dark cloud over the town. She could feel it too, the unease, the anticipation. She knew they wouldn't just walk away after being humiliated. They would be back, and when they returned, it wouldn't be to cause petty trouble. They would come for revenge. She spent her days preparing, though she didn't let anyone know. Her training intensified, and she started paying closer attention to her surroundings. She noticed small things: strange cars passing through town, unfamiliar faces lingering in the shadows. She didn't confront them, she simply observed, gathering information. She knew that in a fight, knowledge was just as important as strength. One evening, as she was leaving the gym, she noticed a man standing across the street, watching her. He wasn't part of the group she had confronted, but there was something about him that made her uneasy. He didn't look away when she caught his eye; instead, he smirked and walked off into the darkness. She didn't follow him, but she made a mental note of his face. She had a feeling he wasn't just a random stranger. The next day, the town held a small meeting to discuss the recent events. The local authorities were there, but they didn't have much to say. They admitted they were outnumbered and outmatched by the group, and they didn't have the resources to handle the situation. The townspeople were frustrated, but no one had any solutions. That's when she decided to speak up. "I know this is scary," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But we can't just sit back and wait for them to come back. We need to be prepared. We need to look out for each other." The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at her. They had seen what she was capable of, and now they were hanging on her every word. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew they couldn't face this threat alone. She suggested forming a neighborhood watch, teaching basic self-defense, and staying alert for anything unusual. The townspeople nodded in agreement, their fear slowly turning into determination. Over the next few days, the town started to change. People began looking out for one another, and the sense of community grew stronger. She started holding self-defense classes at the gym, teaching anyone who was willing to learn. She showed them simple techniques: how to block, how to escape, how to stay calm under pressure. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Meanwhile, the group of troublemakers was plotting their next move. They had underestimated her before, but they weren't going to make the same mistake twice. They had gathered more people, more weapons, and more anger. They were determined to take back control and make the town pay for what had happened. One night, as she was walking home from the gym, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around, but she could feel someone following her. She quickened her pace, and so did they. She knew she was being targeted, but she didn't panic. She had been in situations like this before, and she knew how to handle herself. She turned a corner and ducked into an alley, waiting in the shadows. Moments later, the man who had been following her appeared, looking confused. Before he could react, she stepped out and disarmed him with a swift, precise move. He stumbled back, shocked by her speed and skill. "Who sent you?" she asked, her voice low and steady. The man hesitated, but the look in her eyes made it clear she wasn't going to back down. "They're coming for you," he said, his voice trembling. All of you. You messed with the wrong people. She didn't respond. Instead, she let him go, knowing he would run back to his group and deliver a message. She wanted them to know she wasn't afraid. She wanted them to know she was ready. As she walked home, her mind raced. She knew the fight was far from over, but she also knew she wasn't alone. The town had come together, and they were stronger than they realized. She had trained for this her whole life, and now it was time to put that training to the test. The storm was coming, but so was she. And this time, they would learn the hard way. The man's warning echoed in her mind as she walked home that night. They're coming for you. All of you. She knew it wasn't an empty threat. The group was organized, angry, and determined to make the town pay for standing up to them. But she also knew the townspeople were stronger now. They had started to come together, to prepare, and to believe in themselves. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The next morning, she woke up early and headed to the gym. It had become a hub of activity, with people showing up to learn self-defense and share information. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Everyone knew the danger was real, but they also knew they weren't helpless anymore. She walked in to find a small group already waiting for her, eager to learn. Today, we're going to focus on staying calm under pressure, she told them. In a fight, fear can be your biggest enemy. If you panic, you lose. But if you stay calm, you can think clearly and act quickly. She demonstrated simple techniques: how to block a punch, how to break free from a grab, how to use an attacker's momentum against them. The group watched intently, practicing each move until it felt natural. She moved among them, correcting their posture, encouraging them, and reminding them that strength wasn't just about physical power, it was about mindset. As the class went on, she noticed a young woman in the back who seemed hesitant. She approached her and asked, "Are you okay?" The woman nodded but didn't meet her eyes. "I'm just scared," she admitted. "What if they come back? What if I freeze?" She placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. "It's okay to be scared," she said. "But don't let fear control you. You're stronger than you think. And you're not alone. We're all in this together." The woman smiled faintly, and for the first time, she looked a little less afraid. It was a small moment, but it reminded her why she was doing this. She wasn't just teaching them how to fight, she was giving them hope. Later that day, as she was leaving the gym, she noticed a car parked across the street. It wasn't familiar, and the windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. She didn't react, but she made a mental note of the license plate. She knew the group was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. She couldn't let her guard down. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about what was coming. She didn't know when or how the group would attack, but she knew it would be soon. She had done everything she could to prepare the town, but she also knew that preparation wasn't enough. They would need courage, unity, and a little bit of luck. As she drifted off to sleep, she made a silent promise to herself. No matter what happened, she would protect the town. She had trained for this her whole life, and now it was time to prove that she was ready. The storm was coming, but so was she. And this time, they would learn the hard way. The tension in the town was palpable. Every creak of a door, every unfamiliar face, every car that drove by a little too slowly sent ripples of unease through the community. But despite the fear, there was also a growing sense of unity. People were talking to each other, sharing information, and looking out for one another. The self-defense classes had become a daily ritual, and more people were showing up, eager to learn and ready to stand their ground. She spent her days moving between the gym, the market, and the streets, always alert, always watching. She knew the group was out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. She had seen their cars, their spies, and their attempts to intimidate. But she also knew they were hesitant. They had underestimated her once, and they weren't going to make the same mistake again. That hesitation gave her time to prepare, time to plan, and time to strengthen the town's resolve. One afternoon, as she was walking home from the market, she noticed a group of teenagers huddled near the park. They were whispering among themselves, their faces tense and serious. She recognized one of them, a boy who had been coming to her self-defense classes. She approached them, her steps slow and deliberate so as not to startle them. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone calm but firm. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with worry. "We saw something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's a warehouse on the edge of town. We were exploring, and we saw them, the group. They've got weapons, and they're planning something." Her heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "Did they see you?" she asked. The boy shook his head. "No, we were careful. But they looked serious. Like they're getting ready for something big." She nodded, her mind racing. This was the information she had been waiting for. The group wasn't just lurking in the shadows anymore, they were preparing to make their move. She thanked the teenagers and told them to stay away from the warehouse. "You've done enough," she said. "Let me handle it from here." As she walked home, she began to form a plan. She couldn't take on the group alone, but she also couldn't risk involving the entire town. She needed to be smart, strategic. She decided to gather a small group of people she trusted, people who had shown courage and determination during the self-defense classes. Together, they would scout the warehouse, gather more information, and figure out how to stop the group before they could strike. That night, she met with her chosen team in the back room of the gym. There were 5 of them in total, 2 men and 3 women, all of whom had proven themselves during training. She explained the situation, her voice steady but urgent. "This isn't going to be easy," she said. "But if we don't act now, the whole town could be in danger. We need to know what they're planning, and we need to stop them before they can hurt anyone." The group nodded, their faces serious but determined. They knew the risks, but they also knew they couldn't stand by and do nothing. Together, they began to plan their next move. They would go to the warehouse under the cover of darkness, using the skills they had learned to stay hidden and gather information. It was a dangerous mission, but it was their best chance to protect the town. As the meeting ended, she looked at each of them, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "For being brave enough to stand up for what's right. No matter what happens, remember, we're stronger together." The team left one by one, each of them disappearing into the night. She stayed behind for a moment, taking a deep breath and steadying her nerves. She had trained for this her whole life, but nothing could have prepared her for the weight of responsibility she now felt. The town was counting on her, and she couldn't let them down. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she felt a strange sense of calm. The storm was coming, but so was she. And this time, they would learn the hard way. The night was dark, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow everything in its path. The small team moved silently through the streets, sticking to the shadows and avoiding the faint glow of the streetlights. She led the way, her steps sure and steady, her senses on high alert. The warehouse was on the edge of town, a crumbling old building that had been abandoned for years. It was the perfect hideout for the group, isolated, forgotten, and far enough from the town to avoid suspicion. As they approached the warehouse, she signaled for the team to stop. They crouched behind a row of bushes, their breaths shallow and their eyes fixed on the building. From where they were, they could see faint light spilling out from a cracked window. Voices drifted through the air, low and angry, but too muffled to make out the words. She turned to the team and whispered, "Stay here. I'll get closer and see what's going on. If anything happens, get out of here and warn the others." Before anyone could argue, she slipped away, moving like a shadow toward the warehouse. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. She had trained for this, for moments when every second counted, when one wrong move could mean disaster. She reached the side of the building and pressed herself against the wall, listening intently. The voices were clearer now. She could hear the leader of the group, his tone sharp and commanding. "We hit them tomorrow night," he said. "No more waiting. We take out the gym first, then the market. By the time we're done, they'll wish they'd never crossed us." Her stomach churned at the words, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed to hear more, to understand their plan. She crept closer to the window, careful not to make a sound. Inside, she could see the group gathered around a table, maps and weapons spread out in front of them. There were more of them than she had expected, at least 20, maybe more. They were armed and angry, and they were ready to strike. She stayed there for what felt like an eternity, listening and memorizing every detail. When she was sure she had heard enough, she slipped away, moving quickly and quietly back to where the team was waiting. They looked at her with wide eyes, their faces pale with fear. "What's going on?" one of them whispered. She took a deep breath, her voice low but urgent. "They're planning to attack tomorrow night. The gym first, then the market. They've got weapons, and they're not holding back. We need to warn the town and come up with a plan, fast." The team nodded, their fear giving way to determination. They knew what was at stake, and they were ready to fight. Together, they made their way back to the town, moving quickly but carefully. The night seemed darker now, the air heavier with the weight of what was to come. When they reached the gym, she gathered the townspeople who were still awake and explained the situation. The room was silent as she spoke, the gravity of her words sinking in. But instead of panic, she saw something else in their eyes: resolve. They were scared, yes, but they were also ready to stand up for their home. "We don't have much time," she said. "But we're not helpless. We know they're coming, and we know where they'll strike first. If we work together, we can stop them." The townspeople nodded, their fear turning into determination. They began to plan, dividing into groups and assigning tasks. Some would reinforce the gym and the market, others would keep watch, and a few would stay hidden, ready to act if things went wrong. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was their best chance. As the night wore on, she felt a strange sense of calm. The storm was coming, but so was she. And this time, they would learn the hard way. The next day felt like the calm before the storm. The town was quiet, but beneath the surface, everyone was preparing. The gym had become the center of operations, with people coming and going, carrying supplies and sharing information. She moved among them, offering encouragement and guidance, her presence a steadying force in the midst of the chaos. By midday, the gym had been reinforced as much as possible. Barricades were set up at the entrances, and makeshift weapons, baseball bats, crowbars, and even kitchen knives, were distributed to those willing to fight. She knew these wouldn't be enough against the group's weapons, but they were better than nothing. The important thing was that the townspeople were ready to defend themselves. She gathered a small group of volunteers and assigned them to key positions around the town. Some would keep watch near the gym, others near the market, and a few would patrol the streets, ready to sound the alarm if the group arrived early. She made sure everyone knew their role and what to do if things went wrong. "Stay calm," she reminded them. "Stick to the plan, and look out for each other." As the sun began to set, the tension in the air grew thicker. She stood at the entrance of the gym, her eyes scanning the horizon. The group would come soon, she could feel it. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. She had trained for this, and she was ready. The first sign of trouble came just after dark. One of the lookouts came running into the gym, his face pale and his breath ragged. "They're here," he said. "A whole line of cars, heading straight for the gym." She nodded, her expression calm but determined. "Everyone, get into position," she said. "Remember the plan. Stay together, and don't panic." The townspeople moved quickly, taking their places behind the barricades and readying their weapons. She stood at the front, her eyes fixed on the door. The sound of engines grew louder, and then, suddenly, the headlights of several cars flooded the street outside the gym. The group had arrived. The cars screeched to a halt, and the doors flew open. The troublemakers spilled out, armed and angry, their faces twisted with rage. The leader stepped forward, his eyes scanning the gym with a sneer. "You really think you can stop us?" he shouted. "You're just a bunch of amateurs. This ends tonight." She stepped forward, her voice steady and strong. "You're not welcome here," she said. "Leave now, or you'll regret it." The leader laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're outnumbered and outgunned," he said. "This is your last chance to walk away." She didn't respond. Instead, she raised her hand, signaling the townspeople to get ready. The leader's sneer turned into a scowl, and he raised his weapon. "Have it your way," he said. "Let's take them down." The group charged forward, their weapons raised, but the townspeople stood their ground. She moved like lightning, disarming the first attacker with a swift, precise move and using his own momentum to throw him to the ground. The townspeople followed her lead, fighting with everything they had. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't easy, but they were holding their own. The gym became a battlefield, the air filled with shouts and the sound of clashing weapons. She moved through the chaos, her focus razor-sharp. She disarmed attackers, protected the townspeople, and kept the group from gaining the upper hand. But despite their efforts, the group was relentless. They were trained, organized, and determined to win. As the fight dragged on, she realized they couldn't keep this up forever. They were outnumbered, and the group's weapons gave them an advantage. She needed to think of something, fast. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for an idea, a way to turn the tide. And then, she saw it. The storm was here, but so was she. And this time, they would learn the hard way. The fight inside the gym was chaotic, but she kept her focus sharp. Her eyes darted around the room, assessing the situation. The townspeople were holding their own, but the group was relentless, their weapons and numbers giving them an edge. She knew they couldn't keep this up forever. They needed a way to turn the tide, and fast. Her gaze landed on the gym's fire alarm system. It was an old building, and the alarm was connected to a sprinkler system that hadn't been used in years. If she could trigger it, the sudden burst of water might disorient the attackers long enough for the townspeople to gain the upper hand. It was a risky move, but it was their best shot. She fought her way toward the alarm, dodging blows and disarming attackers as she went. When she finally reached it, she slammed her fist against the glass cover, breaking it and pulling the lever. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud hiss, the sprinklers burst to life, drenching everyone in the room. The effect was immediate. The attackers stumbled, caught off guard by the sudden deluge. The townspeople, though equally surprised, used the distraction to their advantage. They pushed forward, disarming the attackers and forcing them back. She moved through the chaos, her movements quick and precise, taking down anyone who got in her way. The leader of the group, realizing what was happening, shouted for his people to retreat. "Fall back," he yelled, his voice barely audible over the sound of the sprinklers. "Regroup outside." The attackers began to retreat, stumbling over each other in their haste to get out of the gym. She didn't let up, pressing the advantage and driving them out the door. When the last of them had fled, she turned to the townspeople, her chest heaving but her eyes blazing with determination. "We need to secure the building," she said. "Barricade the doors and windows. They'll be back, and we need to be ready." The townspeople moved quickly, following her instructions without question. They dragged tables and chairs to block the entrances, reinforcing the barricades as best they could. She knew it wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy them some time. As they worked, she pulled aside a few of the more capable fighters. "We need to take the fight to them," she said. "If we stay here, they'll just keep coming. We need to hit them hard and fast, before they can regroup." The group nodded, their faces serious but determined. They knew the risks, but they also knew they couldn't just sit back and wait for the next attack. Together, they began to plan their next move. Meanwhile, outside the gym, the group was regrouping. The leader was furious, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he snarled. "We're not leaving until that town is in ruins." His people nodded, their expressions grim. They had underestimated the townspeople once, but they weren't going to make the same mistake again. They began to prepare for another assault, their weapons ready and their anger fueling their determination. Back inside the gym, she finished explaining her plan to the small group of fighters. "We'll split into 2 teams," she said. "One team will stay here and defend the gym. The other will come with me. We'll flank them and hit them from behind. If we can catch them off guard, we might be able to end this." The group nodded, their resolve unwavering. They knew the stakes, and they were ready to fight for their town. As they prepared to move out, she took a moment to look at each of them, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "For being brave enough to stand up for what's right. No matter what happens, remember, we're stronger together." The storm was far from over, but so was she. And this time, they would learn the hard way. The small team moved silently through the darkened streets, sticking to the shadows and avoiding the faint glow of the streetlights. She led the way, her steps sure and steady, her senses on high alert. The plan was risky, but it was their best chance to turn the tide. If they could flank the group and hit them from behind, they might be able to end the fight before it escalated further. As they approached the edge of town, she signaled for the team to stop. They crouched behind a row of bushes, their breaths shallow and their eyes fixed on the group ahead. The troublemakers were regrouping, their voices low and angry as they prepared for another assault. She counted at least 15 of them, all armed and focused. They hadn't noticed the team yet, and she intended to keep it that way. She turned to the team and whispered, "Remember the plan. We hit them hard and fast, then fall back. Don't engage unless you have to. Our goal is to disrupt them, not take them on head-to-head." The team nodded, their faces serious but determined. They knew the risks, but they also knew this was their best shot at protecting the town. Together, they moved into position, spreading out to surround the group. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. She raised her hand, signaling the team to get ready. Then, with a sharp motion, she gave the signal to attack. The team moved as one, striking from the shadows and catching the group off guard. She disarmed the first attacker with a swift, precise move, using his own momentum to throw him to the ground. The rest of the team followed her lead, hitting hard and fast before retreating into the darkness. The group stumbled, their shouts of anger and confusion filling the air. The leader of the group, realizing what was happening, shouted for his people to regroup. "It's a trick," he yelled. "Fall back and stay together." But the damage had been done. The team's attack had disrupted the group's formation, buying the townspeople precious time. She signaled for the team to retreat, moving quickly and quietly back toward the gym. They had done what they came to do, and now it was time to regroup and prepare for the next phase of the fight. When they reached the gym, the townspeople were waiting, their faces tense but hopeful. She quickly explained what had happened, her voice calm but urgent. "We disrupted them, but they're not going to give up. They'll be back, and they'll be angry. We need to be ready." The townspeople nodded, their resolve unwavering. They knew the stakes, and they were ready to fight for their home. Together, they began to prepare, reinforcing the barricades and readying their weapons. The gym had become a fortress, and they were determined to hold it. As the night wore on, the tension in the air grew thicker. She stood at the entrance of the gym, her eyes scanning the horizon. The group would come soon, she could feel it. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. She had trained for this, and she was ready. The first sign of trouble came just after midnight. One of the lookouts came running into the gym, his face pale and his breath ragged. "They're here," he said. "And they've brought more people." She nodded, her expression calm but determined. "Everyone, get into position," she said. "Remember the plan. Stay together, and don't panic." The townspeople moved quickly, taking their places behind the barricades and readying their weapons. She stood at the front, her eyes fixed on the door. The sound of engines grew louder, and then, suddenly, the headlights of several cars flooded the street outside the gym. The group had arrived. The storm was here, but so was she. And this time, they would learn the hard way. The group poured out of their cars, their faces twisted with rage and determination. They were bigger in numbers now, and their weapons gleamed under the streetlights. The leader stepped forward, his voice booming as he shouted. "This ends tonight. You had your chance to back down, but now you'll pay for crossing us." She stood at the front of the gym, her posture calm but ready. The townspeople behind her gripped their makeshift weapons, their faces set with resolve. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they weren't backing down. This was their home, and they were ready to defend it. The leader raised his hand, signaling his group to attack. They charged forward, their shouts filling the night air. She didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her own hand, signaling the townspeople to hold their ground. "Wait for it," she said, her voice steady. "Wait for my signal." The attackers were almost at the barricades when she finally shouted, "Now." The townspeople sprang into action. They pushed the barricades forward, creating a wall of resistance that forced the attackers to slow down. She moved like lightning, disarming the first few who got too close and using their own momentum against them. The townspeople followed her lead, fighting with everything they had. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. The gym became a battlefield, the air filled with the sounds of shouts and clashing weapons. She moved through the chaos, her focus razor-sharp. She disarmed attackers, protected the townspeople, and kept the group from gaining the upper hand. But despite their efforts, the group was relentless. They were trained, organized, and determined to win. Just as it seemed like the townspeople might be overwhelmed, a loud horn blared in the distance. Everyone froze, turning toward the sound. A line of cars was speeding down the street, their headlights cutting through the darkness. For a moment, no one knew what was happening, until the cars screeched to a halt and a group of people spilled out, armed and ready to fight. It was the neighboring town. Word of the attack had spread, and they had come to help. She felt a surge of relief as she realized they weren't alone anymore. The reinforcements joined the fight, turning the tide in their favor. The attackers, now outnumbered and outmatched, began to falter. The leader of the group, realizing the fight was lost, shouted for his people to retreat. "Fall back," he yelled, his voice filled with frustration. "This isn't over." But as they turned to run, she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "It is over," she said, her tone firm and unyielding. "You came here thinking you could take what wasn't yours. But you underestimated us. You underestimated me. And now you're learning the hard way." The attackers fled, their retreat chaotic and disorganized. The townspeople cheered, their voices filled with relief and triumph. She stood at the center of it all, her chest heaving but her eyes blazing with pride. They had done it. They had protected their home. As the adrenaline began to fade, she turned to the townspeople and the reinforcements from the neighboring town. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "This wasn't just a victory for us, it was a victory for all of us." Together, we showed them that we won't be intimidated, that we won't back down. The townspeople nodded, their faces filled with pride and determination. They had faced their fears and come out stronger on the other side. And as they began to clean up and tend to the wounded, she knew that this wasn't just the end of a fight, it was the beginning of something new. A stronger, united community that would stand together no matter what came their way. The storm had passed, but so had she. And this time, they had learned the hard way.